Today, 52SC special guests, and we bring in people that have done it before, share their knowledge. We got Joe Caparatta again, Manhattan Aquariums, Unique Corals, Marco Rocks, shares his experience today on aquascaping like a master. He's gonna hold your standard of master.
I didn't make that up.
You've done, actually, he's the one that did the 750 in the WWC hybrid.
That was a lot of fun.
So that one, you know how that one turned out. But what are the considerations? So I just aquascaped a whole bunch of tanks here. I just went through it, so I'm like primed and ready for this conversation, man, because I had been knee deep in it. But we want to aquascape like a master. You want to get these tanks right. So even if you're just kind of interested or you're thinking about a new tank or whatever, man, this is the conversation for you.
Cool.
Okay, so first questions. These are all the questions you're going to hear. The answer to throughout this episode is how do we satisfy both biological and aesthetic needs? How do you plan for the end game and the types of corals you want to have? How to avoid aquascaping yourself into a corner? Glue, epoxy, mortar, Jenga, what's best? The easy way to get real stability. How much room do you need away from the glass? And do I need to consider the rock as a filter as well? The slant. How do corals grow and what looks most natural in a tank? All of those things, the heart of mastering aquascape. I'm gonna hold you that standard. Start with number one.
Let's do it.
How do you satisfy both biological and aesthetic needs?
So biology, kind of a wide term here, but what are we trying to do with our aquascape? We're trying to create surface area for our bacteria to grow. You know, in the absence of, say, a wet dry filter, your rock and your sand becomes the surface area for a lot of the waste that gets broken down for the bacteria to colonize to break down that waste. It's also the home that your fish sleep in at night. So you want to take into consideration, what are the animals we're trying to keep? How much surface area do I need? Is it like 1 pound for every 2 gallons or something? And then what looks good? You know, what am I going to be looking at? It's your tank. I say me, but I'm aquascaping like it's my own. It's your tank. Do you like a white look? Do you like a black rock, a purple coralline covered rock? So, you know, you have to decide, do you want that branch look? Do you want that shelving plating look? So all those things have to be kind of put together in this plan before we attack it.
So that's the piece that was interesting here. To satisfy both biological and aesthetic needs. Like, I want to look awesome and satisfy the biological needs. Immediately you would think of, you know, where the bacteria populate as a biological element. But biology is everything that lives in there. It's the fish, it's the coral.
Yeah.
And so when you're designing this aquascape, like, what kind of coral am I going to put in here? What kind of fish am I going to put in here?
Right.
Design it for them while simultaneously making it look awesome as well. Best thing you could do is go search aquascapes and just like keep flipping through pages on Google Images until you find one. Go to Reef's like tank of the month, whatever you want to do. I just keep flipping until you're like, that one speaks to me. I'm going to be in that universe.
And take your time with it too, because this is one of those things that if you put your time in and you build that awesome aquascape, it's going to reward you with what should be years and years of visual pleasure. You know, it's often that we don't have the patience. We want to set up the tank quick. So, you know, as soon as we get it, we can't wait to put water in it. Oh, let's get the rocks in quick. No, let's take our time. Let's plan it like you do. You build these scapes. It could take days, maybe even weeks to do it. If you take your time with that and you really think about the angles, the arches, the different height, don't make it all the same, you know, the end result will be that much better.
Yeah, I would say that most of them now take me, some of them take me 1 day. And some of them take me up to 3 days now.
Okay.
But like, you know what, actually, there's 1 day of finding inspiration, actually. You know, just kind of looking through stuff, and it's probably not all in one sitting, but combined. Yeah. Okay, and I'm going to give you my secret sauce here. My secret sauce at this point is go to the ocean. Like, so you saw the Predator tank. I want to go look and see, like, where do, you know, groupers hang out? Where do eels hang out?
There you go.
Where do lionfish hang out?
Yep.
And so not only can I now like design it around the biology of that animal, but like there's 8 million videos on, you know, an eel in the ocean, like whether it be YouTube or Google, you know, videos or whatever it is, even just the images of it. And like I can find one that says, I want my tank to look like that.
Yeah.
And I did that there. So I found a couple of them and in videos, and I stilled it out. and then I printed out the picture and I put it on the wall, you know, behind the tank, and then I built it in front of the tank on a table. And like every time I was just kind of looking up at it, it's like, am I achieving my goal here? And like when I'd stray, I'd kind of bring it back. And because of that, I hit that goal. I was super, super happy with how it turned out in the end.
You got like layers of excitement and inspiration to be able to take a picture of a still picture of something in the ocean and recreate it. That's the best. I did one for a client using, he had a Tessellata moray and he wanted this eel cave and he gave me a picture. So I used I think it was a 3-inch PVC pipe with a few elbows on it. And then I used the Tetra Pond spray foam, which was safe in water. And I glued a bunch of different rocks and shells and some coral. This was years ago. And created this super awesome cave structure that resembled what he wanted. And it was weighed down with the rocks. The whole thing sunk and it was perfect.
I'm sure the eel's super happy in it.
Oh, yeah.
It feels comfortable. It's happy. So like you matched it to the aesthetic needs. So you're gonna see that in like every single episode of 52 SE is like you're gonna see like a lot of thought put into each one of these aquascapes. And I'm gonna tell you the biological needs too is one of the things you're gonna see is none of these are gonna be a big stack of rock, which is a detritus trap leaned up against the back of the tank. I made that mistake enough times that I'm done. You know, I've learned my lesson.
And getting stuff off of your sand bed, like if you're familiar with some of the older methods, the Jalbert method or the plenum method, you know, I think it was the Jalbert method that would suspend the rocks from like strings. So your entire sand bed was left to react with the water column, where a lot of your anaerobes would be in the sand, breaking down nitrogen and phosphorus and keeping the water column clean. And they found that if you stack all the rocks on it, you're negating that interplay between the water and the substrate. Of course, that's extreme, and we don't like to. We don't like to look at rocks being suspended like that. But you know, a lot can be taken from that. You know, the less footprint you have, the better. And with the mortars we have, the glue, and the techniques we have, and the lighter, more porous rocks, you can create these dramatic-looking caves and gravity-defying ledges while not stacking so much in your sand bed.
You're going to see lots of gravity-defying ledges. You're going to see lots of ridge structures. You're going to see a lot of stuff that like just isn't a big giant stack of rocks. And you're gonna see how it may have started out that way, but like when we decided what we're gonna make, inspired by like all of the imagery that we found, you know, looking for that source of inspiration, inspired by the biology, you're gonna find like how you can create something really cool. Like the best thing that anybody could ever tell me is like, man, that looks like you're snorkeling. Like, because that's my goal, is I'm trying to bring that into here. And then even in some of the things that like don't look anything like snorkeling, like, you know, our little collection tanks, like the LPS collection tanks, like I still want that thing, man. I want to think about the biology of supporting filtration, supporting the, you know, filtration meaning pollution export, but also filtration being the bacteria. And where these animals are going to live, thinking about, you know, the tiers, you know, like everything below this one is going to eventually be shaded by the one above it. You know, how do I account for that? Either in having it sloped in the right way that like they come out from each other, or from a lighting perspective that it doesn't matter that the one that on top of it is the shading, like these little teeny pinpoints of light ain't gonna cut it. You know, so how do I account for that? You're gonna see that through all of it. Yeah, you wanna look at surface area on the reef. So when you're designing an aquascape, it's important to also look down, because the corals are all fighting for the light that's coming from the top. And one trick, I remember we actually talked about this when we designed the WWC one, is, and I learned this from talking to Sanjay, when you're designing a tank, you remember the corals are growing into the light. So when your light is directly above the tank, the corals are going to grow up into it. Eventually, you'll wind up seeing the undersides of the coral. So sometimes if you can shift your lighting, push it to the front of the tank and angle at like a 20 or 30 degree angle, your corals grow into the light, providing for a much more pleasing surface. So these little tricks you can do either with spotlights or just angling your lights will result in a better view down the road. You can actually do that with flow too. The corals will grow into the flow. You know? I don't know why, but I guess like early on I would assume that the corals like grew away from the flow because they were, you know, getting pounded or something. But no, that's where the best biology is happening. So they grow towards it. You know? So the more flow that's in the front, you'll see them grow. It's the hand that feeds them, right? They're gonna extend into it. Interesting thought. All right, the next one here is how to plan for the end game and types of corals you want to have. Man, have I made this mistake before, and I'm trying my damnedest to not do this anymore, and it's really, really hard. I'll share why, but like you get into how do you plan for the end game? Not where I am today, but where I want to go.
So I think one of probably one of the most common things that we see when we're decorating aquariums, especially for clients, is you want to fall in love with the aquascape. But really the aquascape is analogous to the foundation or the first floor of your house. Really, when you look at a finished house, it comprises of a foundation, a first, maybe and a second or a third floor. The corals is your first, second, and third. Your rock is supposed to just be your foundation. So you want your finished aquascape to be below the pleasing focal point of what the finished reef would look like. Most corals, especially with the technology and the lighting we have, are going to grow very fast, and they're going to reward you with, within 6 months to a year, you'll have mini colonies if you started with frags. You want those to not be up at the top. You want those to be at eye level with still room to grow, and fish swimming over the reef. Just like in the wild. You don't want the fish, having 1 or 2 inches where they got to fight with the coral heads in the top of the water.
They're eventually going to come out of the water.
Right. Oh, they will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
160, man, we made this mistake.
You started with them too high.
Too high, and then like all just grew right out of the water.
Yeah. And then you got all this usable space that wasn't really being used right.
Yeah.
So start lower. I don't like to scape. I mean, there's so many, you ask 10 people, you're going to get 10 different answers. But I personally like, and I've looked at so many tanks, is having one rock spire that's higher than the rest, going almost to the top. And you can plant select corals because in nature, when you dive, oftentimes you see a bommy or a rock ledge that does go to the surface. But most of the other reef is happening 10, 15 feet below. So as long as 60, 70, 80% of your tank aquascape is representative of what you would see when you dive, it's okay to have one rock mound that's a little bit higher. And bonus points if you can make that rock mound hide your overflow or a large piece of equipment too.
So when you were here last time and building that aquascape for the 750, you gave me 2 rules. One was put cardboard on the back of the tank, not to protect it, but just kind of like as a reminder, don't let it ever touch the cardboard.
Yeah.
Keep the rockscape off it. But one of the other things you said was on an SPS tank, don't let almost any of it go above the 50% point in the tank. Okay, and that, like, as a video creator, it ate my soul because it just looks so empty, man, without the coral in there. And I know full well, man, it's going to be like 18 months before that decision seems like a wise one. But when it's there, you will sure seem wise.
Yeah, it doesn't look good when you just see the undersides of a coral and the top of the coral is at the water level. It's just something.
You got to remember, like, these are 24-inch deep, right?
Yeah.
And so it's super easy to get an acro to go, 9, 10 inches big.
Yeah, let it grow. Let it grow.
So it's gonna be within a couple inches. You just have to wait for that.
Yep.
So it's a reef building coral. Yep. It's gonna build its own reef. You're just building the base.
Right.
Okay, so I just ran into this challenge with the Chromis tank as aquascape, right? And your voice is in the back of my head the whole time. Don't go over 50%. Don't go over 50%, right? But I know, in reality, because I was thinking about getting like an acro, like a whole colony, like right out of the ocean, big one. And I'm like, really, all this really needs is like a little mound of rock over there. But if I show this little mound of rock to people, they're all gonna laugh at me. I'm just like, oh, I can't do it. So I ended up building like a ledge, that has that zero gravity kind of element underneath it.
That peninsula thing,
and it doesn't go above. But when I was done, I started to question myself now, which is, okay, there's 2 paths I can go here. I can go get a big giant acro and put it on there, or I can go get a ton of frags. So the first thing that came to mind was like, go to ORA and just find whatever the cheapest thing is and get like 150 of them, and then I'll just turn this whole thing. And then oddly enough, like as I was thinking about it, Battle Corals, Adam hits me up and I'm like, hey, maybe you can do this. I'm still debating here, but what I got out of it was, if I was going to do the wild coral, I think that just a little teeny mound of rock would have been best, and then mount it to that round mound of rock and let it grow out. It wouldn't be an aquascape even. It's just like a little mound of rock.
Yeah, just a little balmy.
Okay. But now that I built out that cool shelf, if I, populated that with a whole bunch of same frag, or even like a bunch of 3 different types of frags or something, then what would happen is it would make that shelf would end up being like the base of the coral, and eventually you wouldn't even know that there was a shelf underneath it.
Right. The best reef tanks, you can't even see the rock structure over time.
Yeah.
It's just corals.
And so I'm kind of leaning towards the use 8 million frags on this thing. I know full well that it's going to take forever, and that all the viewers are going to like, I don't know. I'd be curious to hear what you guys think. Which would you like? Should we just put a big giant acro in there to begin with, or should we let it grow out over the course of 12 plus months and become that?
Right. Yeah, there's pros to both. Certainly supporting ORA and getting small frags, probably something that's easier to replicate, for the hobbyist, and you'll create one super colony. A lot of times with farming, if you take a whole bunch of frags and you let them grow into each other, they'll grow faster than 1 or 2 larger pieces. And sometimes those larger colonies can be a little unpredictable, getting them to acclimate to captivity. So if I had to choose, I'd probably go with a bunch of like corals, frags.
I think what it would do is it will end up making that whole ledge look like a colony in the end.
It would, yeah.
And I think it'll have a better look in the end. It'll just take longer to get there.
Yeah.
But the point of the matter is plan for the end game. The types of corals you want. There's always pressures.
Yep.
You want it to look full in the beginning. I want it to look full in the beginning.
Yeah.
I want it to look good on camera.
Yeah.
I mean, there's always different pressures to it. But don't make the mistake of filling the entire thing up with an aquascape.
Yeah.
But there's also other corals, there's a softy tank here. And that one goes all the way to the top. And when I'm talking softies, I'm talking about anything that doesn't have a skeletal structure.
Okay.
And I'm not talking about the little needles, I'm talking about like a base.
Yeah.
So that's your zoanthids, your mushrooms, your xenia, your green star polyps, anything that doesn't have a hard calcareous skeleton.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, now on a lot of that stuff, I can have a aquascape goes, largely up close to the top, because, zoanthids aren't going to grow up.
Right.
They're going to grow over.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So think about the animals.
Yeah, certainly. Yep.
All right, next one here is avoid aquascaping yourself into a corner. I can't wait to hear what you say.
So this one is not the figurative into a corner. It's, if it's recommended that you need 80 pounds of rock for a 120-gallon tank. So you go and you buy 80 pounds. Well, now you're stuck using all 80 pounds. So it depends what the recommendation is. If it's gonna be where you're ending up with 80, if that's the goal, then you really wanna start with like 100, 110. So you're not picking the last pieces to finish your aquascape with the last pieces that are in your box or something. And that's challenging because it's like a puzzle where you're trying to match everything perfectly. It's just not realistic, and you're gonna probably set yourself up for failure. So try to have a little bit of extra rock, and it's always nice if you work with the store. If you could return it, or if you have another tank you could use it in, you could even take the excess rock and put it in your sump. Where I'm going with this is not everyone can afford to have 20-30% surplus rock, so there's always some kind of use for it. You could seed your next tank with it, or like I said, just put it in your sump. But the main takeaway is you want to have enough material so that you're not stuck trying to fit a giant piece where a small piece is supposed to go.
Okay. Every time we talk about this, I always feel like I'm trying to sell rock. I don't know, because we sell rock here.
Yeah, and I can see people already.
20% more rock out of somebody. That's not it. I'm hat on is aquascaper hat, right? Yeah. Never, man. Never have I gotten to a tank where I spent I wanted 100 pounds of rock, and I used every last piece of it, and it was a perfect amount. Man. Right. Nothing I was ever happy with, I should say, right? So all of them, I would say, to get the looks that I'm really looking for, double. Yeah. I need the pieces around, man. You say aquascaping yourself in a corner, and then the first thing thinks of is literally getting in the corner. Yeah. What I'm thinking of as actually the dwindling amount of rock on the floor. The dwindling amount of rock on the floor means I've got myself to hey man, I'm really happy where this looks, but I just need to fill out this other area to get this done, and I just have none of those pieces work. This isn't gonna do this. And I've gotten to the point where I'm hammering, I'm breaking apart.
Well, that's another thing. Yeah, you can force it to a certain extent.
Yeah, but
it's great when you have extra. And some of the best jobs I did, like when I did Greg Carroll, we had probably 3 times the amount of rock. Now, could I have done a great job with 20%, 30% more? Absolutely. But it wouldn't have come out as perfect, because when your eye is looking for that perfect shape, you're probably not going to find it in a dwindling amount of rock. It's just the
Okay, I'm gonna like shoot from the hip here, like give you a rule of thumb. Okay, if your tank needs 100 pounds to be full, and you got 100 pounds, you'll build something between okay and good, depending on your skill level, right? If you have 20-ish% more than you really need, the chances that you build good go way, way up, and less dependent on skill level, because I don't have to like create the pieces that I need. I actually have them already.
Yeah.
If you want to create an aquascape that you see in pictures and you want to do the best of the best, you need double.
Yeah.
Yeah, like you said, triple for Greg Carrollson, right? Yeah. You just, like, this puzzle piece doesn't come pre-assembled, man.
Yeah.
You know, like you have to like create it.
Right.
And, you know, dancing around that doesn't help anybody.
Yeah.
You know, and so what the big question is, like, what do you do with the other 50 pounds or 100 pounds that you didn't use? I don't know, save them for the next tank. There's probably one coming. I don't know. But like, it was the cost of, you know, making it happen.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know. It is definitely an important piece.
Yep.
And I just think of the corner, and I, like, in my mind, I'm having a panic attack as that little pile on the floor is getting smaller and smaller.
Yeah. We've all been there.
All right, next one. This one, I can't wait to hear what you have to say as well, because I've got a lot of thoughts on this one now. Glue, epoxy, mortar, Jenga, what's best?
Another one of those things. They all work. They're all great. The mortar, I prefer when you're trying to build long-term heavy rocks, real serious ledges. Nothing works better than the hydraulic cement, the mortar. I think for smaller pieces, when you want to create really cool ridges and mounds, like the Gorilla Glue works really well. Like a cyano, one of those types of glues. And then when I say like the Jenga is kind of like when you have a rock mound and you're not gluing it all together, and then you go and you move a couple pieces, the whole thing could fall like a Jenga pile. So we don't want that, obviously. But we also like the ability to be able to take rocks apart if we want to change things. Let's say you have to catch a fish, or you don't like this coral here and it's stuck to a rock. It's nice to be able to move stuff. So it's a little bit of a trade-off. You lose the ability to change the scape. You're also married to it if you glue it. So it's more of a personal preference. But when we're doing it for customers, we do like to glue it in so we know it's going to stay. It's not going to have a landslide. It's not going to scratch a panel if it falls. And if we have to get a fish out, we deal with it.
Okay. I won't build it without one of those things now. At this point, like, I was a stacker, you know, back in the day.
We all were, I think.
I just hadn't progressed my skill level yet. Right. And now, like, I mean, I could never just stack the rock and be happy with it in almost any case, right? And then even in some of the cases, the one that does come to mind that I might be able to stack it would be the shelf stuff. Yeah. You know, like Marco sells this shelf stuff that does actually, you know, kind of plate out in a cool way.
It locks together really stable, especially on foundation rock. It seems to work well.
Yeah, that one comes to mind as a maybe, but even then I would do it for sure. So, but like all of them now, like, whether you use epoxy, glue, or whatever, holding it together. One of the things I want to do is hold it together really well, because there are times, man, where I want to move the tank, I want to move to a whole other household, or I need to get a fish out that I just can't catch. And if I could go into my aquascape and literally lift the whole thing out in one piece, I can catch that fish, man. You know, that's a last resort piece, but like, what if he's killing everybody? You know, I had a red chorus wrasse the other day that just decided it wants to kill everybody. It was fine until that day. Right. And man, we had to spend 3 days catching that thing. Damn. You know, and in the 360, dude. No. But if it was a 120 after day one of trying to catch them, if I had two solid piece of aquascapes, I would have just lifted it out, grabbed them, and put them back in. You know?
And that's another thing. You could build it in multiple pieces. You know, 2 or 3 pieces that, when they're together, they look like it's a single structure. But for transporting it, for building outside of the aquarium, or for doing like what you said, catch the fish, you could just pull out one structure, then another one, and then another one.
Okay, in terms of my favorite and using them, mortar for me is something that builds a really solid structure. Like, I mean, it goes in, wraps around everything. It gets into the holes of stuff. It's not really all that adhesive in many cases, but it's like structurally really sound, right? I have a hard time like getting it in anything that needs to go on the underside, you know, because it's like this magic amount of thickness to be able to get it so it's not like drippy, and then it's not so dry.
Like a thick pancake batter is what you want, or like a pancake batter.
It is the cheapest though. Like, you know, like it is like versus epoxy or something is way less expensive. You get a bucket of like mortar, which is like it's not your Portland cement from Home Depot. Right. You know, it's designed for your purpose. And it's got cures underwater. Has like a silicone or something in it.
It's got a polymer that prevents flexing. You want to let it cure out, but you can do its final stages in water.
There's some things where I just want a picture of the fish on the front and assume that people got it. And in this case, it's that one. Okay. So, and it's inexpensive. So, this case, I would use it, but like I can only use it in places that are kind of downward for me, right? Okay. For me, epoxy, super glue, and accelerator is the key in most cases. Because with super glue, and I can buy those big, BRS jugs of it, the big, huge things, get the accelerator spray out. I can assemble it, and glue it together in a manner where I can build up the structure just using the accelerator and the super glue, and I can get where I want to go. And sometimes I just don't want to like it. I just tear it all apart. And I can, get the glue off pretty easy with the little snippers and stuff and start over. But like it holds enough structure. But once I get where I want to go, then I use those 2-part epoxies. And what's cool about those things is I can push them up underneath.
Jam it in all the nooks and crannies.
So you don't see it anywhere. We did an investigate recently. We didn't share the results of it yet. But we went and matched the like 12 different epoxies to the like 12 different types of rock. If you get the color right, it's impossible to see as well. So like on that one right there that has this ridges on it, I mean, there's lots of epoxy there, and you can even see it, but you can't see it because it's a perfect match. It blends right in. So like, for instance, the purple coral crete is like a perfect match to the purple Marco rock. You can't see it.
Got it.
And especially, if you push your thumb in it and it's all flat, you can see it. But if you take another piece of rock, push it in, give it some texture, you can't see it anymore. Or even just push a little rubble into the epoxy on the outside and leave that little rock there. Can't see it. So for me, I want this thing to look like the ocean, and to look like the ocean, it looks like it has to be one cohesive thing. I made the mistake though in the flowy stony tank. We built it into one giant structure, and I thought it was going to be strong enough. But like, I mean, you're always learning something. Dude, it was too damn heavy, man. Like lifting something that's 150 pounds up over the edge of glass and then down back into it. Scary. Right? And now I'm not going to be able to lift it back out like I just described. Would have been way better if I had intentionally built it in 2 pieces that slide together. And it could have been an overhang situation, so it actually looks really natural or something. I think you can even build it as puzzle pieces. That like go together. They just go together in 2 pieces. So for me, it's epoxies. One of the things actually, black epoxy. Never thought I would use that. The Nios team sells black epoxy. Okay, it doesn't color match, but man, it hides because it's in shadows already. And so you just don't see it.
Interesting.
Now on white rock you would see it. But all the purple stuff, you don't see it. So
blends in.
I don't know. Those are, I think all of those tools. Right tool, right job. Just decide what your job is. The mortar though, man. I mean, just to give you a scope, with the glue and epoxy method, I bet you I go through 20 tubes, sometimes 30 tubes of epoxy, at $6 to $10 a piece, plus the glue, plus the accelerator. I'm into $300 in adhesive alone, right? And so some people just heard, I don't care, I want to build the thing I want to build. Some people said, no way, right? Mortar now, you got $30.
Do 2 buckets
mortar,
or whatever.
You got enough for
Yeah.
You get 2 aquascapes out of that.
Right.
You know, and yeah.
And mix it up in batches. Don't mix it all up at once. You know, you want to add your powder and your liquid and your water. Mix it up. You get 10 minutes of working time before it starts to really harden, and then clean the bucket after. Take a break and go back at it again.
The last tip on this, on the epoxy thing is we got to get this episode out, but I will share it in one of these 52 episodes. But like match, don't have to pick a favorite brand of epoxy. Match the color.
Yeah.
And I'll go this far. We use the Coral Creech from Seachem.
Okay.
And I hate that stuff. Like it was so hard to mush together. It was so dry. We had to like soak it in water first. And it was like all of our hands hurt from mushing it because it was like dried up and whatever. But because it was the perfect color match, don't care. We're gonna go through that level of effort.
Right.
And I'm happy with the result.
Yeah.
My hands were bruised from mushing it, but don't care.
You got the look you wanted.
We're committed. Okay, next one here. What is the easiest way to get real stability? I bet you some of you already know.
The easiest way to get real stability in your aquascape, start with a solid foundation. So there's a lot of pieces on the market where the rock is cut flat. If you start with that, then obviously anything that you glue on top of it's going to be much more stable. The question always comes up, well, if I aquascape even with a flat stone and I put it on sand and then I have a burrowing blenny or a goby and they go in there and they move some of the sand, isn't it going to shift? Probably, but the chances are it's going to remain stable. You could lose a little bit of sand here, a little bit of sand there, but naturally one hole will get filled, the other one gets filled. They don't all usually get pulled out at the same time. And once it's all done and it's locked together, everything's kind of holding itself. Another reason to use mortar or an adhesive, because once it's all built, even if a little bit of sand was to be removed, you'd still be okay. So for that reason, I love starting with, and don't use more than you need. Usually, on a 120-gallon tank, 5 pieces of like foundation rock or something cut flat, and you want to use larger pieces to span the gaps between them to allow for water flow, really cool habitats for fish and stuff to swim underneath it. You want to kind of elevate the reef as best you can off of the sand bed, or if you're not running a sand bed, to run it right off the glass bottom. But you really want that flow along the bottom to keep the detritus in suspension, and it makes the tank generally healthier.
So what you're talking about is the Marco foundation. He's trying to be nice. But like it is just rock that literally machined flat on the back, on the bottom, and thin. Okay.
Yeah. And you could use that for any kind of aquascape on top.
Okay. I'd use the stuff in everything, man. I don't even care if I'm using a different type of rock. I'd still like to use this stuff for the reasons you described. It's super duper flat. It hits the bottom. What's cool too is, and then like the rock doesn't look like it's kind of like going into there. It looks like the rockscape's emerging out of the sand, it would in the wild, right? Yeah. Okay. The cool part about it for me is if I'm going to create those like overhangs and ledges and stuff, well, like you have to defy gravity, and when you defy gravity is where it creates a like cool look. Mm-hmm. And the way that you defy gravity is if this was the overhang, if I just put a rock here to leverage it on it, man, it's not going to work. It's just going to flop over. But if the foundation piece is actually out like a big
like a cantilever,
cantilever, but most of it's actually underneath the sand, that's where you create that impossible look that's hidden underneath the sand. Now, one of the things I've done too is like, I used to buy only your big stuff, I'd want to use a big, huge foundation. I started using a bunch of the small and medium ones and then kind of snaking them together into the shape I want. And then I'd use the mortar because the mortar is the strongest. Sometimes I use epoxy here too, but and then create the piece that I want as the foundation out of the smaller pieces, make that cantilever.
More meandering while also getting the structural support that you need.
Okay, another cool piece that I don't think anybody uses these things enough for. So, you ever had a problem with sand blowing around your tank?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, all of us, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I was looking at this. I went snorkeling in Hawaii recently with our editor, Dave. We were just trying to get inspired, right? And one of the things we saw is you go diving around there and like in the offshore reefs, or I should say reefs that are accessible by shore, what you see a lot is like sand, but there's all these ridges and stuff that's kind of like holding it in place. And so you see all these little ridges erupting out of the bottom, which is the reef structure, and then there's sand all over. And it's these ridges that are holding it in place. And so we're always trying to look for like bigger, badder sand that's going to hold in place, or use special grade, or use whatever. One of these things you can do is use the foundation pieces and have the just little tips of it erupt out, you know, as islands around. A, great place to put cool corals, but B, also creates little dunes where the, you know, pumps can't blow the sand away.
Yeah, it's a natural barrier to prevent that energy from just taking your sand away. It traps it in.
Where it's most specifically useful is in the center when, you know, your opposing pumps hit each other, create turbulence and shoot down and blow it away. Now, if you can create some kind of dunes there, it will, instead of all the sand just going to the sides of the tanks, it will hold it in.
You just gave me an idea now of taking rubble and creating these meandering paths, you know, leaving a little break here or there, but around the perimeter of the tanks, just so it doesn't look so obvious. But I bet you can do it in a way that would trap the sand in the middle and create this natural barrier.
And so we actually built these pieces out of rubble. So at one point in time, when we're talking about biology and habitat, we got, Elliot showed me where wrasses tend to live. And they tend to live in these rubble fields. You know, so it's just almost like if you can imagine like Tonga Branch, just broken up as like far as the eye can see. And there is wrasses, like thousands and thousands of them, just shooting up and down, in and out of all this stuff. And that's kind of like their natural habitat, at least these fairy wrasses. And so when I went and built one of these things, and it wasn't like Branch, but I took a bunch of little pieces and glued them together to create what otherwise looked like a rock, but had just a huge network of holes through it. And man, in like side of an hour, the wrasses had already moved in. They knew that that was my home.
Yeah, that's great.
Right?
I love it.
Okay, well, also could be your little dunes that hold the sand in place as well. All right, we're kind of going back to here. How do I satisfy both biological and aesthetic needs?
It all plays back to that.
Yeah, biology for the fairy wrasses. Aesthetic, I don't want the damn sand everywhere.
Right. And mixing in a larger coarse grade, I find, you know, if you're using a fine sand, mixing in something a little bit heavier too, the heavier stuff tends to migrate to the top anyway, and then it kind of holds it in place, and it looks very natural.
A lot of times you'll get like the little bits blow to the side and the chunks stay in the sand, but it's still better than seeing the bottom of the tank.
100%.
I mean, the ocean doesn't have this mythical floor that turns black all of a sudden. All right, the next one in here is, I've been guilty of this one so many times. How much room do you really need for the glass?
Really enough to clean, and the particulars of your tank, how deep it is, how tall it is, you know, front to back, how you can reach, can you clean it from the back? Those all come into play when you're designing the aquascape and leaving enough room. If you have to get into an area with a stick only, well, you want to have a little bit of an angle room, so you want to pull your rocks 3-4 inches off it. The other thing is, you know, the rockscape when it's dry looks a little different than when it's filled with water. Everything seems to be magnified underwater. So if you've got a rock structure that's only 3-4 inches from the front glass, once it's filled, it's going to probably look a little bit closer. But the most important thing is that you can clean. I've seen people where they set up tanks and then they can't get the magnet through one spot, so they go all around it, and then there's just one area that just grows week after week, more and more algae. So you really want to make sure you can get everywhere around. And you want the water to flow through the back area too, not put your rocks against the glass. At least that's my preference.
I just got this problem, man. Like, I don't know, man. Like, I build out the PVC cube, you know, so I build my aquascape, so I know where the barriers are to this thing. I just can't help but not want to fill it. Right? And so I think in some ways I'd just be better off like artificially, like if somebody could sneak behind my back and just clip off a couple inches of it. But I want to make it like, I don't know. I see the vision, and the vision just keeps going. And I just keep going with it.
You know, a lot of reef keeping is discipline. And if you if you try to extract where the fun is in this hobby, a lot of it, at least for me, I can really only speak for myself, is hunting for new fish, hunting for new coral, researching late at night, maybe with a glass of wine, what am I going to do? And oftentimes money becomes a limiting factor, which kind of controls the discipline. It kind of works to your advantage. But let's say you have the money. We see it in New York City. People want everything today. Well, is that really fun? Like if I could just flick a magic wand and the tank is done, is that fun? Is the end goal really the fun, or is it all the steps along the way? Is it learning? Is the little epiphanies? Is it researching the new fish, going to the fish store with your buddies on a Saturday? To me, that's the fun part. The process, the journey, rather than the end game. So, being disciplined and recognizing where you're going to get the most fun out of this, and then tying that to the process, I think, you'll extract more juice from this lemon.
Okay, so I want to get to that coral bit about Insta-Tank thing.
Yeah.
But one of the problems that I have, I've gotten to the point where, like, under no circumstances is the structure going to I come close to glass. I have to be able to clean it.
Yeah.
But, man, I've gotten kind of close in some cases. And what happens is exactly what you talked before is, yeah, it looks fine, man. It's 2.5 inches, 3 inches from the glass, which is more than enough to clean. But when you realize the optics of glass and how it makes things shrink,
yeah,
it looks like it's about to touch the glass,
right?
Which is not normal, and it doesn't look good.
Yeah.
So every time that I ultimately end up getting further away from the glass, I'm happier with how it looks in the end, and I just got to figure out how to stop.
Yeah.
This isn't necessarily related to this, but like you said, would you just want the dream? Somebody come over and pimp your tank and add 8 million coils to it.
And it's done.
Okay, I don't talk about this a lot because, I don't know, I feel like it's a first world problem, that like most people wish they could have.
Right.
Okay, but, people like you have done that for my tanks before. We just pimped out the 160 and filled it up with corals day one, right? I don't know, it's fun for camera and stuff. But I feel like something was taken from me. I don't know, man. It's just I don't care about it the same way I cared about it if I had
struggled with it.
Opened up, going to the fish store, man, and had to think about whether or not I wanted that coral enough, right? Or even if I opened up, a box of corals once a month and really appreciated the 6 that came.
Yeah.
And then eventually ended up with the 150 that were going in there. But when they all come 150 at once, man, first world problem. I didn't like it.
I didn't either. Some of my best memories, and I've always been, this has been what put food on my table, taking care of aquariums, but it's also been my favorite hobby. So my spare time, I was playing with my own tanks. And going to the fish store on a Saturday morning, whether I was riding my bicycle before I had a car or going with my buddy who was older than me and he got a car first, those are some of my fondest memories. I mean, dude, check this out, come over here, they have this. And I see it now when I go into my store, and it's very easy for me to forget that, but they're living what I lived, and it's magical, and this could be the same for baseball card collecting, for sports, for anything really, but we're talking about aquariums here. So don't rush it, take your time, plan it, because that should be part of the best memories you'll have from this experience.
So you're going to see that in this. And so there's a few different people that are sponsoring some of the corals that are going in here. UniqueCorals.com is sponsoring one of the tanks. Worldwide is sponsoring one of the tanks. Eric over at Route 66 is sponsoring them. Talking to Adam over at Battle Corals, debating the Chromis tank one of how we want to approach that. But also the Elliot over at Marine Collectors is providing all the fish for all of these tanks. And despite everybody's desire to make these things instant tanks, we're not doing it. So we're going to add a handful of corals as the series progresses. Every month we'll just add a few more. And what I would like to do, when I say like to, this is the hard plan, but we're going fast and furious here. So I got to figure out how to manage Dave and I's stress level. But what I want to do is create shorts out of each one of these animals, and so, here's the Moorish idol, video of it, why it's awesome. Here's how you take care of it. I don't know, you call it expert only, or you just feed it this and it's just fine. Source it from somebody that takes care of it and sends you a healthy one, and then feed it the right food, man. It's not a big deal. And so, but
I can see the comments now.
Yeah, well, but
I'm just kidding, but in reality, it's so true. It's so true.
it is that easy, man. And so, but also, like, you know, here's the blastomussa. Like, this thing, man, normally in the wild, you find it's 80, 90 feet deep, man, on a ledge somewhere. Like, so, hey, this is a beautiful, stunning, fairly slow growing coral that, you know what, put it somewhere dark and it's going to thrive and you're going to love it. Right? But like in a 60-second short, you know, like just like really easy to digest, and then just share all of the animals that go in here, you know, one by one. Even some of the ones that are like less blastomussa, but I mean, here's like, you know, the Bob Marley Revenge, you know, acro or whatever they call them these days.
Right.
You know, like pick the one like, this is what the mother colony looks like. Here's what the actual coral looks like. This is cool. You know, it came from an area with, you know, it seems to thrive in 300 par or whatever. Like, put yourself in connection with each one of these animals in a way that, like, bam, filled with coral. Like, it's just.
And Jake, I credit Jake. I think I referenced him in the last film or episode. We when he came, he was really big on creating these micro environments. He was hyper aware of where these corals are found in the wild and to recreate that. And I was coming from setting up aquariums professionally and then building a coral farm, and I wasn't hyper aware that there are individual needs of all these coral. So he kind of helped me to make myself aware and create these microhabitats. But a lot of that can be extracted, that knowledge, and applied to the people watching this and the tanks you're building, right down to the aquascape choice, the design, you know, how much rock, how high, do you need caves, do you not need caves, do you want sun corals glued underneath? Some of the best. I saw this tank, De Jong set it up at Interzoo, this giant shelf, and he had all this tubastry and sun corals glued underneath, and there was like 30 cardinal tetras swimming in the flow, and then you had grammas that were upside down, just like you would see on a reef. And I'm like, dude, that's the underside. Everyone's focused up here. This guy they just created this whole habitat underneath.
Want to go do it right now?
Let's do it. Yeah, I mean, it was so inspiring.
All right, little deviation here. All right, the next one here is, do you need to consider the rock as a filter as well? We're aquascaping. How much consideration do we need to think about it as a filter?
Right. And it comes back to what we were saying before with the biological needs. A big role that your rock should be playing in a system is to provide surface area for both aerobic at the surface and anaerobic bacteria deep inside. And that's where the porosity comes into play. Also, your sand bed. You know, if you have a thick sand bed, that's going to provide a lot of surface area. You could probably argue that with a sufficient sand bed, the rock becomes less and less important. So in a bare bottom tank, you probably need a lot more rock. And it also comes down to how much biomass is in the tank. Biologists and professional aquarists will calculate in pounds the amount of biomass and extrapolate from that how many cubic feet or meters of filter media do they need. It's a known formula. This amount of surface area will filter this amount of biomass. Doesn't matter the size of the system, it's the biomass. And you know, we don't really focus on that stuff in our aquariums, but that same application should be applied, or we can learn from it, is what I should say. So I don't like set answers like you need 2 pounds per gallon, because every system is different, and that might work for this person, but this person's got a more heavy hand, so it's not going to work for them because he's Italian and he feeds heavy. So, but as a general rule, you want that tank filled with rock for biological capacity. In my opinion, those tanks work best. And when I say filled, halfway, filled is a general term, but you want the aquascape complete with, you know, I don't even know. You answer how many pounds per gallon.
How many pounds per gallon? Made up. I would never even.
You never even do that. Okay.
I never even, I just think about how many animals I'm going to put in there. Is it going to be a lot? And how am I going to compensate for that in a variety of ways? And so a couple of things I would think of is, I mean, I never gone to the effort to prove this, but I'm pretty certain that a sand bed has more surface area than the rock itself, probably to a great degree. Yeah. You're usually putting about the same amount of pounds in there. Is that? But it's this that it's like the activated carbon thing, like a tablespoon has the same surface area as a football field or something
Right,
like that.
something
Right?
crazy,
When
yeah.
you look at it, and the little grains of sand
Yep.
that are basically rock but broken up, they have so much more surface area, especially exposed because
Yep.
it's all broken up.
Yep.
Also, all the food settles out in there. That's where it rots.
Mhm.
And so that's where the bacteria populate.
Mhm.
I think about it now in terms of like, all right, so I'm going to have a lot of fish too, but there's like sources of ammonia come from like a couple of sources. One, like the fish eat the food, and then they get rid of the excess nitrogen through their gills.
Yep.
Right, they're getting rid of the ammonia through their gills because there's too much nitrogen in the food. So that's one way. But like, so I could rely on bacteria, but also like most of the algae and stuff in the tank actually prefers ammonia as their source of nitrogen. So they're not waiting for it to turn into nitrate.
Yep.
Corals probably too. And so, I heard once that somebody shared like ammonia is like nitrate with excess energy. Like it's like nitrate's almost like a depleted battery that I'll use if I have to, right?
Yeah, it's already been used a few times. Yeah. The nitrogen cycle.
Okay, so we're gonna get through that. So about like a refugium,
Yep.
I'm addressing the bacteria, the filtration,
Yep.
like in ammonia, not just nitrate. But the bare bottom piece, like if I wanted to go bare bottom, man, I'm gonna put a lot more thought into how much rock I have and where I'm gonna put it, especially if I'm gonna put fish in it. And I used to not care about the fish. Like I would, like they were an afterthought.
Yep.
And I go, here, put a couple of fish in there too. But I was after the coral, right? Now I really like the fish, and so there's really low chance I'm gonna have many tanks that have no fish in it, or very little. And so I just can't stand the look of the bare bottoms in my own tanks anymore.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of it.
Yeah.
It's hard to fall in love when it looks so bare and unnatural.
It just looks so foreign to me.
I think for growing coral, for growing acropora, for high flow and keeping the water, there are some advantages from a farming perspective.
Oh, yeah.
But from an aesthetic, trying to recreate nature, it's about as far as you can get.
Okay, if your goal is when you're aquascaping these things and deciding you want to do sand and how much biomedia and stuff, your goal is to grow a ultra stable acro tank where these things, the acros grow really, really well, and you're not getting tons of detritus product, and you're not getting like old tank syndrome and stuff like that. Bare bottom all the way.
Yep.
I just keep looking at it. When I was looking at that 750, all I could ever think of is this would look so much better if there was sand in it.
Yep.
I just could never get past it.
Yep.
This is just a personal opinion. A
Yep.
lot of people like it when you cover it in coral and stuff. It's just another place to put coral.
Do you think that comes back to what you fell in love with when you were an aquarist? Because I think a lot of the newer hobbyists, they got acclimated to tanks without sand, tanks with frag plugs that are visible. So that is their inspiration. Maybe we go back further when we didn't see these little frag plugs, and to us it's like because it's out of our comfort zone. I'm just curious on that. Yeah.
Some people have like phobia of like holes or weird things. I have a phobia of frag plugs. It's just
yeah. Glue is here.
Yeah. I don't know, man. It's an interesting thing, but you should plan for it. If you're going to go bare bottom, know for sure it's going to take way longer to get a stable.
It might cloud up on you.
Yeah.
The UV will help. Yep.
Personally, man, you're going to either it's all roll of the dice here, but like if you're going to go bare bottom and you're thinking bacterial and like how do I think of this as a filter and how do I fight against other stuff specifically with a high power tank like an SPS tank, you should find the livest rock you can possibly find, or just assume your dry rock's going to take you a year.
Yep.
It's going to take a year before this thing stables out. It will.
I've seen people do remote sand beds too, just to try to get some of that sand back in the system. And that could be like a bucket where the water's flowing in and also flowing out, just like a somewhat static remote bed, or even in a part of your refugium, just a big container of sand.
I guess
so you
this
get
question,
some of that back.
Do I need to consider rock as a filter? The answer is yes. You should. And the sand is just broken up pieces of rock.
Right.
You should think about it all holistically. How many fish am I going to have? How often am I going to feed? That's another one. Like, you know, with one of these tanks, we're gonna have you know, a school of antheas in it. I'm gonna feed 1 pellet per fish per hour.
When the lights are on.
Yeah, when the
Yeah.
lights are on. Okay, and I'm going to do that because I've been really successful keeping them alive that way.
Yep.
Uh,
And we don't expect you to measure the food and compare the surface area. So the next best thing is to constantly test your ammonium nitrite, especially over the first 6 months to a year. And if you find you've always got elevated detectable levels of either of those, then something's out of balance. And it could very well be that you just don't have enough surface area to handle the waste that's constantly being produced in there. And the answer to that would be to add more surface area, whether that's more rock in the tank, more rock in the sump, more sand, maybe a bio block or something with known surface area.
There you go. Next one here is, okay, I can't wait to hear what you have to say about this because I'm not sure about my opinion on this. You might help me develop it, actually. The slant. How do corals grow and what looks natural in the tank? I mean, what do you mean by the slant?
So whenever I would go diving or look at a reef that would inspire me, everything's growing out into the sunlight. And they're growing up at a slight angle or flat. They don't usually grow down away from the light. I mean, what would be the environmental trigger for them to grow away from the light? Doesn't really make sense. So when we recreate these reefs, sometimes you see people, they glue rocks at angles going down or like this. And you can argue that for aesthetic value, the eye of the person that's looking at, the person who's enjoying the tank can do whatever they want. But for me, and I think I would represent a lot of people looking at it, you want the tank to represent what you'd see in nature. And that would be ledges coming out, maybe at 10, 15 degree angles going up. I don't like to see the back side of a rock facing the front glass, so you want to put it, to the left or to the right so you can see what's on top of that ledge. And have stuff either flat or just canted up a little bit.
That's interesting, man, because like if you think about the shelf rock scapes that you build, they're all kind of like flat. Because if they were at angles, they would just look weird, most of the time. So they're kind of like flat, maybe a little teeny bit of tilt to them or whatever. But like, if I were to look from the top, I would say this looks like a lot of reefs that if I just put my face down with a snorkel, right?
Yeah.
But if I look through the side, I guess maybe, but the problem is like corals are all growing on the top. So like I'd have this shelf and there'd be a whole bunch of acros. If I look from the top, it'd look awesome. But I'm looking through the side at it. And so you kind of naturally want to tilt it so that you can see like the tiers of these
And that's
things.
what I mean. I don't mean, you've got multiple tiers and flat is okay. Flat is totally okay. But as you get to the back, you can tilt them up a little bit so you can see the corals on that ledge is what I mean. If it's flat and it's back, you might not see them as much. And that ledge is supposed to represent the ancient coral that died to render its surface area for the next generation of corals to grow. And that coral naturally was growing at an angle, died, and now things are populating. So flat to slightly elevated is my personal choice to represent what I see in nature.
So would you say that that's true of all styles, or just, are you talking, acro tanks? Are you talking, Euphilia tanks? Are you talking softy tanks, or all of them?
Well, it's impossible to have one fit all. And you could argue that every time a natural disaster or storm comes through, it's knocking all the rocks down. So what is natural? Are the corals growing on rocks and coral ledges that are now broken at angles? Yes, they are. But I don't care about what is natural some of the time. I want what looks best. And to me, a healthy reef, one that's really grown out, has got corals plating in tiers. Like you see those plating hyacinth acros, and they're just in like ledges. You could almost walk on them in steps. And if you could recreate that spiraling up, to me, that looks supernatural.
So like, I'm thinking again, like you got to get a little bit past what it looks like day one and think end game again.
Yeah.
But like, if you could use those shelf pieces and then just build out concentric ledges where, I just imagine I'm going to bonsai these things because I'm building a collection of them. Or if you're going to let them get big, this would be a different conversation. But if I was building a collection of acros and I was going to let them all be like a softball size, then the shelf should be about softball size, and then the neck ledge are going to be another softball size. So you can just kind of, display so many of them.
Right.
Yeah. One of the interesting pieces though is like, you think of like a lot of LPS tanks, and what you see is like kind of ridges and or walls or whatever, and then they're like displayed, across the whole thing, right? But if you saw like a Goniopora in the wild, it would normally be like a big giant sheet on the ground. Like you just see tons and tons and tons of this thing. You wouldn't see like a little frag plug of it coming out of the side of the rock. So this is a total deviation from what it looks like in nature. In our shelf, what we would do is, like it would be kind of like a ledge, but then we intentionally put pieces that stick out just a little bit farther, knowing that's where the coral is going to be. And they're kind of like spaced differently so they're not, shading each other underneath. But the goal
but
there.
Use your sand bed too. With an LPS system, Goniopora, you can stick them right in your sand. That's where a lot of them are found. Fungia, heliofungia, trachophilia, all of those. And again, you look at the morphology of it. If it's got a conical base, like elegance corals, there's two different types. The ones that grow in meandering ridges, and they break those and they leave them in the ocean, they let them heal up, and then they sell them. And then the ones that look like they're just like a V. And the V ones are found in muddy lagoons. They literally pluck them out of the mud. The other ones that are broken are cut from giant meandering, like solitary corals. But look at the coral, and you can learn a lot about where it should be placed based on that morphology. And use your sand bed.
Okay, so I've never seen one of these in the wild, but I think of scolies, right? And so a lot of people will get scolies, little round like donut corals, and you stick them in the sand. But I've heard that's actually a branching coral, if you see it in person.
The scolies are typically found, 50 to 100 feet in Australia, if we're talking about the Australian ones. And you can find them on the sides of rocks. I don't think that they're branching per se. They definitely protrude and come out. They have a little bit of an elongation, and they're just slicing them off. But they're also found just completely embedded into the rock.
I've never seen one of these
and high flow usually too.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, learn something new every day.
Yep.
Good news is we're going to learn something tomorrow as
Ah.
well, because this series continues. If you want to see Joe and all the special guest stuff, including all of the series of the 52 SE, you can see it in the playlist right here.
Awesome.